before we dive into everything, let's go ahead and do our episode recap, which each week we like to give a recap since this content is so very long, keep everybody caught up. There's a lot of information. And we actually take the recap from this discussion that you're currently witnessing, and we upload that separately just to help out the peeps at home who need a little bit of a refresher. If you happen to be one of those people watching the recap, hi, I'm Will, that's Blake, we're the Pixelists. If you are interested in learning and hearing more about EXU, jump on over to our full discussion video, and we'll link that down in the comments, down in the description, whatever YouTube people do. And a little final note there is we do have timestamps. So if you came from the recap, you just watched that whole thing. It will also be in our discussion video, but check those timestamps. You can just skip to exactly the place you want to be. Um, but yeah, I guess without any further ado, let's just jump right into this.
Yeah, let's do it, man. So
All right.
this was episode 6, The Gift Among the Green. And this was a almost 5-hour episode. So here's our best chance at recapping it. But basically, the episode opens up. It's been a few days after the crocodile wrangling at the runestone, where Opal flipped the croc, and the parties continue to make its way through the jungle. They eventually come across this lazy river, and they're amazed as they follow this river down. They're following their eyesight down the river, and they see these 100-foot walls of this gray-green concrete ancient city. And fy'ra is smiling. She's proud, and she's saying, "This is Nirdalpak, and it's the last city of the Gennar civilization." And she actually tells them, "This is where I've been leading you through the jungle, and it's actually been hidden all these years, and only those who are able to pass the Wild Mother's test are allowed to actually find it." She also explains that she's been here before. It's where she went when her sister died, and this is the place that bestowed onto her her gift that we've seen her use time and time again. The party is, I think, a bit relieved and like, "Oh, finally, we've made it somewhere." And they decide to go skinny dipping. They jump into the river. They're laughing. They're having a great time. And they basically slowly wade down towards the city walls. Once they're there, fy'ra announces herself, and they're allowed in to be brought before the tetrarchs, who are known as the rulers of the city. Once they get into the city, they realize it's this massively amazing city. It's got at least 15,000 people. There's all sorts of races. Really, just a smorgasbord of even like, I think, was it goblins? Was it hobgoblins that they see walking around
Yeah,
like as citizens?
they saw lots of stuff, and like as we'll find out later, like elephant people and cat people, like it was a melting pot
It,
seemingly.
it's pretty cool. In fact, why don't you just take it over from there?
Okay, yeah. So they walk into the city, kind of taken aback by all of it, but fy'ra's like, "Hey, we got to make a stop at an old friend's house," and we learn that this is Gennar, I think is how you pronounce it, house, an old friend of fy'ra's, and quick introductions and stuff, and she's immediately like, "Okay, I gotta feed you guys," and she jumps in the kitchen and begins cooking for everyone. And as her and fy'ra are catching up, Gennar mentions that there's been like this ominous tone in the city as of late, and a shadow ever since the dark moon was seen. And she was referring to Ruidus, the smaller moon of Exandria. And she says that one of the tetrarchs, Tetrarch Umeji, has left the city to go south to the Iron Authority, who are like um, this kind of like ominous group that we don't know too much about, but they're like warmongers, and they worship the betrayer gods. And basically, that there's a bad omen coming. That's like the vibe in the city. And
Mhm.
Umeji left to go see if the Iron Authority is aware of like what's coming, what's happening. fy'ra is shocked to hear that she's left because that's who she was bringing the party to speak to, Tetrarch Umeji. So she was like, "What? She's not here?" And Gennar was like, "Yeah, she's not here, but she spent the night at my place before she left." Anyway, the after the party, is meeting Gennar and all of this, they decide to ask her about the runic sigil from the ash hole. That basically the whole purpose they came here, and she lets them know that well, one, she recognizes it. She's pretty nonchalant about it. She's like, "Yeah, this just means place of burning. Like, what's the big deal? What do you want with this?" and basically lets them know that the the way the symbol is drawn has as much meaning as the actual like calligraphy is not the right word,
Yeah, like
but
the shape of it's just as important as the actual language
right,
itself or something like that.
right. And so she's just like, but yeah, it means place of burning and cool beans. And they're like, oh, okay. And she's like, I'm no scholar. If you're right, did you tell them I was like some scholar? And they're like, no, no, we'll go talk to the other tetrarch and see if
Mhm.
we can find out more. But anyway, while they're eating and stuff, the party meets her dog, Google, who's this like big mutt of a dog, and they're all beginning to play with him. And Ashley Johnson, of course, as always, gives him scritches. Like, name a more iconic duo between Ashley Johnson and petting an animal. But as they're playing, the dog at one point actually grabs the crown and they have to kind of wrestle it away from him. It's all a big thing, but Dorian is thankfully able to ultimately get it from him. So they settle down, they're eating, and while they do this, they make their introductions. Formally, fy'ra introduces the whole party to Gennar, and it's here that we learn that Dorian Storm is not Dorian's real name. So everyone begins to pry and be like, "What? What's that's not your real name? What is your real name?" And he says that, "Okay, you know what? I'll tell you guys my real name, but only my first name, and only if everyone else like shares a deep dark secret as well." And so everyone's like, "Okay, we're in." So Dorian reveals his real name is Bronte, and that his mother calls him Bron, but that he still wants everyone to call him Dorian, and that he left his name behind. Um, then Opal reveals that her real name is Georgina and that her mother left when they were very young and she doesn't want anyone to call her Georgina, like still call her Opal. So then we get to Dariax and he's like, I'm a pretty open book. But then he does reveal that he and Tharla Star never actually dated. He was just a big fan and made that up to sound cool. So then we get to Fern, and she's like, I don't really have any secrets, and she like kind of struggles to think of something to say, and then finally reveals that her parents left a very long time ago. She hasn't seen them in about 50 years, and once again, everyone's like, 50 years? How old are you again? And I think she's 114, 115, or something crazy like that. But no deep and juicy secrets with her really. Um, and then with Orem, kind of a similar story, but he does reveal that he doesn't really have a father. Well, he did, but he left when he was young, and his last name was Tarantel, I believe. And Orem kind of just abandoned that name because he didn't really have that father.
Mhm.
But then he says, okay, I actually was checking out Dariax's butt when we were all skinny dipping, and it wasn't half bad. um, and so then we get to fy'ra, or Fudorai, who says that she tells this kind of more serious story about her and her sister when they were younger, how they were climbing this rock, and basically her sister Firakai fell down, and in so doing, kind of crashed into Fudorai, and Fudorai ended up breaking her arm. And Fudorai says that they went back to their parents, and she knew her parents would be mad, so Fudorai just took the whole blame and said it was her own fault. She fell and broke her arm and kind of kept her sister out of all of it. And she basically said that, ever since her sister was mad that, she kind of took all the blame and protected her in that way. And that just kind of explains like the dynamic they always
Mhm.
had since then, since Fear Rise all about protecting her sister. Um so yeah, they're all swapping these stories and Gennar basically adds that the Kenoran civilization where they are used to be this massive thing with four large cities in each cardinal direction, and Niropak was at the center. And since there were these four big cities, basically there was a leader of each one, and that is what the tetrarchs were. And every so often they would come to Niropak and basically make the decisions to guide their civilization. But that was a long time ago, and now there are no longer the four cities. Niropak is all that remains. And we find out that they are ancient, so much so that they don't refer to Taldore as Taldore. They don't even know what Taldore is. They called it Gwasar. And yeah, I think there was. feel like there's one other thing she revealed there, but now I can't remember. But
It's a
it,
huge detail, but
yeah.
no, yeah.
But yeah, so she reveals that, and I think it was that, like, oh, you're so old, like, are you ancient? And she's like, no, I'm only 40. Just because this place is ancient doesn't mean the people here are.
Right.
And so anyway, after they get all caught up, fy'ra is basically like, okay, you know what? I got to take them to go see the tetrarch so we can learn more about this rune, and they head off.
Yeah. And so on their way to the format of the city is not very clear, but they're heading basically to like a plaza, like sort of like a central point of the city. And as they arrive to this plaza square, they come across this massive statue known as the Observer. And Abria doesn't really describe much about what this observer looks like, other than that it's feminine. But whenever they look at it, Dariax has this moment sort of outside of the party where the observer actually comes to life and animates and looks down at him and says, "Hi, what are you doing?" And he's like, what's going on?" And she basically says, "Hey, I like what you're doing. And I just wanted you to know that you're going to continue to have my favor if you need it." And he's like, "Well, who are you? Who am I getting favor from?" And she says, "Simply, I observe." And then she also adds, "The gift is strong with many, yourself included." And then says, "My chosen are coming. They'll explain more." Very uncertain what she's meaning.
Yeah.
But then that conversation ends and she returns to being the statue. And the party's kind of like, "Oh, cool statue." And then they realize that Dariax has had now this moment. fy'ra Rise actually is really surprised that the observer spoke to him and is like, "What did she say? What happened?" And he's like, "Yeah, this is what she said." Well, so fy'ra kind of explains that the observer basically sees everything and also helps others to be able to see. And they decide to continue on into the central plaza. And as they're walking into the building where the tetrarchs are, there's these two big lion-esque statues that have it's hard to describe. It's like these three heads that are conjoined,
Yeah.
these lion-esque heads. And Abria sort of casually says, they're kind of like this Bandersnatches-esque
Yeah.
type monster. Well, once they're inside, they meet Tetrarch Thraskull, and Thraskull is a Loxodon, which I don't know if I'm saying that right. Loxodon?
I think so.
Loxodon? Okay. I think of it, this is going to really piss off some people. I think of them as like the Babars of Exandria.
He is.
It's an elephant like race that this is one of the first times they've officially been included in Exandria. And this is one of the Tetrarchs, one of the leaders of Neardalpak. And Thraskull is some sort of seer, some kind of oracle. And like the observer, they seem to have some kind of deep knowledge about things that are happening, not just in the city, not just outside the city, but especially details about the party. In one case, they're sharing a mirror with Opal, who's just like, "I just need to get a look at myself." And Opal actually sees a familiar face with two different eye colors in the reflection, and she's really taken aback. And Thraskull rightly points out that, "Hey, this is your mother, isn't it?" And Opal's like, "Yeah." Thraskull also sees other eyes that are watching Opal, which is a reference to eyes that fy'ra has gained insight on other eyes that were watching Opal earlier through her gift.
Right.
And it's pretty obvious this is Murata or the Singorn elves, or we assume it is. And Thraskull basically says, "I'll remove the scrying spell from you and keep you from being tracked any longer." Thraskull also goes to Aurum, and an acolyte comes out and brings this dark seed that Thraskull hands over to Aurum and basically says, "Hey, this arrived on the wind before you got here, and I knew it was meant for you." And Aurum's like, "Thank you. What do I do with this?" And Thraskull's like, "You're a Genasi, so make it grow." And he's like, "Okay." And then to fy'ra Rai, Thraskull talks about fy'ra Rai's family, specifically her sister, and says, essentially, "I see your sister alive and waiting for you to the north past Iman." And fy'ra naturally is just totally shocked about this and is like, "My sister's alive? Are you kidding me?" And Thraskal's like, "Yeah, your sister's alive." Thraskell also generically talks about the party and describes the party and says there's something really special about all of you. The I don't say necessarily the omen on you, the fate that has sort of been drawn out for all of you. You're all going to make a really important decision for better or for worse. And even says it's either going to be sort of like for a great outcome or a terrible outcome. And even points out that the rune that they've been looking for more information about, they say that it's not just a place of burning, but it's a gateway of power. It's a place of massive energy. Um, on top of this, Thraskell talks also about Umeji going down to the Iron Authority and saying that something is coming, and says, in sort of like a fatalistic kind of way, sort of accepts the fate of whatever's destined for Nidalpak. And
Yeah.
even asks the party to remember their experience here and to sort of tell stories of what life was like here, which is not something you sort of just casually tell people if you're going to be around much
Yeah.
longer. But it's, Thrask was sort of talking about this ominous omen over the city, and then finally is like, okay, I'm going to go look at the stars and kind of call it there. So the party heads out, but not before fy'ra doubles back and privately talks to Thraskell. And when they were talking earlier, Dorian had said, "Hey, why don't we all go south to help your friend Umeji?" And Thraskell was like, "Well, she can probably take care of herself, but if that's what you want to do." Well, fy'ra now at the end of the conversation is like, "Hey, I'm worried that Dorian wants to go south, not because of Umeji, but because these people worship the betrayer gods." And she basically says, "I'm worried about him." And Thraskell says, "You're right to be worried. He's losing himself to something, presumably the circlet." Uh, and then fy'ra goes back to the party and they exit out of the building. So you want to wrap us up from there?
Yeah. So basically, the entire rest of the episode from that point is this like chase battle scene. So as the party's leaving the plaza, um, kind of catching up, Opal is all of a sudden struck by a poison dart that just immediately begins to knock her unconscious. And I think it was Dorian happens to notice like movement in the smoke, and so they're like, "Okay, what's going on?" And so basically the chase scene just happens. Someone who's invisible runs in, grabs Opal, throws her over, oh my gosh, over their shoulder, and just begins darting away. So Opal is just looks like she's levitating, like running away from them because, like I said, she's being carried by someone invisible. So Fern and fy'ra immediately go after her, and Fern transforms into a dire wolf and is using her like keen sense of smell in order to track them, since the person's invisible. And actually, what they do is Opal was initially still visible, but this person, we're told, removes like a ring, and that's what was casting greater invisibility, and then puts the ring back on. So then Opal too becomes invisible. Um, so we cut to Ted, who is inside Opal, and she is like fighting off this poison dart that Opal was struck with, and that is giving Opal enough strength to be able to remain conscious during all of this when she should be unconscious. And because of that, she's able to muster the strength to cast Misty Step and teleport actually onto Fern's back, who's the direwolf. And so then the three ladies are all still chasing down this invisible person, and they do manage to catch them and pretty brutally murder them.
Yeah.
Um, Meanwhile, the rest of the party is kind of back a bit at the plaza because not only was there this invisible captor, but there was another figure as well, who we come to find out is Murata of the Singorn Elves, and she has cast a spell that has animated those two Bandersnatch statues Blake was just talking about, and is causing them to attack Orem and Dorian. And meanwhile, sorry, no, yeah, Dorian. So meanwhile,
That's right.
Dariax has used his hat of disguise to make himself look like Opal to try to like provide some distraction because he knew that they were after Opal. So he's like, well, if I look like Opal, maybe I can get them to come back and try to get me. And so while that's going on, Dorian and Orem are fighting off the Bandersnatches and continue to chase Murata. And she basically, in this moment, is revealing that, she's all in on capturing Opal for some reason. She says that all will be lost if she is not able to capture Opal. So they, are deal with these Bandersnatch statues and go after Murata. And she proudly states that I will burn the world to have what I want. And then she, boom, dimension doors out. And so, yeah, they aren't able to stop her or anything. Um, so then, now that all that combat and craziness finishes out, we're able to rescue Opal. Um, the party is basically getting ready to move on, but fy'ra actually says, "You know what? I can no longer go with you. I found out that my sister is still alive, so I have to go. I have to go in that direction. I have to go try and find my sister." So she kind of says her goodbyes to everyone, and in so doing, kind of has a little private moment with Dorian specifically,
Mhm.
and reveals to him that she knows that he knows the truth of what happened. Because a few episodes ago, Dorian had his memory restored
Mhm.
and remembers the past with fy'ra, but neither of them had ever talked about that yet. But so she lets him know that, hey, I know you know, and she just encourages him to, hey, like, make the right decision. And it's pretty vague. And he just says, yeah, I'll do anything for my friends. And that's basically where the episode ends. But we do have another post-credit scene, and in this scene we see Ted, who's just basically exhausted from having to ward off that poison from Opal and protect her. And she is confronted with two purplish eyes, and Ted screams, and that's where the episode ends.
And that's episode number 6, The Gift Among the Green.